Welcome to Book Watch, a weekly production of the Midwest Book Review. I'm James Andrew Bell Cox, your host for this series of conversations and discussions about books and about publishing. And I have an author with me by the name of William S. Bike, or Bill as he prefers to be called, and he has written Winning Political Campaigns. This is a kind of a reference book, a sort of how-to for anyone interested in throwing their hat into the political arena at the local, municipal, or county, statewide level, or even federal offices. This is a very useful volume that fell into my hands, and I reviewed for a little column that I write called The Political Science Shelf. And I found out that Bill was close to hand and invited him to come on the show, and he said yes, and here he is. Welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, Jim.
Bill, I like to start my interviews by asking my guests to give us a little thumbnail biography of yourself. Where were you born, raised, went to school, family?
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, which is certainly a hotbed of political activity, to say the least. And I went to DePaul University in Chicago, and I was a political science major there at DePaul. And so that's where I got my interest in politics. Also, when I was a kid, it seemed like my dad and my uncles were all union guys, and so they were always talking about politics all the time. So I think I even had a little bit of an interest even when I was a little kid. Then when I went to high school, Watergate was going on, and so I was really got interested in politics that way. So that's why I decided to major in political science when I went to DePaul. And at DePaul, I decided to become a journalist, actually, because I joined the student newspaper and found out that writing was really what I wanted to do. So I've tried to kind of put the two together, political science and journalism in my career. So I've worked for a neighborhood newspaper in Chicago called the Near West Gazette for about 15 years. And the Gazette is in an area that in Chicago is also a real hotbed of political activity. It covers what used to be called the old First Ward, which was possibly the most corrupt ward in the city. And so it's also an area where a few wards meet, a few state rep districts meet. We've got 2 congressional districts. So even though we're not a real large paper, we cover a lot of political activity for the Near West Gazette. So I've written for the Gazette for about the last 15 years. I'm the associate editor, and I'm also the political editor. And so that's where I've done a lot of my writing.
An editor and pundit.
I believe so.
A journalist and opinion maker. Have you yourself ever run for political office or worked in a campaign for somebody that's run?
Yeah, I've done both. I ran for office in Chicago. There are some local neighborhood organizations, and they're each run a little bit differently, and some actually elect their members. So I ran for the Lakeview Citizens Council. Lakeview is a neighborhood on the north side of Chicago that includes Wrigley Field, so a lot of people who are not even from Chicago have probably been in the Lakeview area. And so I ran for a seat on the Lakeview Citizens Council. I didn't win, but I was appointed to a seat later because I ran a decent enough campaign for a first campaign, and so they saw that I was very interested in being involved, so I got appointed to a seat later. Harry Truman said that you really don't know politics until you've actually run for something yourself, and that's really true. So that's one of the reasons I feel qualified, even though I ran for a very tiny little office and didn't win. You really learn a lot that way. Since then, I've worked for a number of campaigns, and actually the publisher of the Near West Gazette is a fellow named Mark Valentino, and we were in a state reps district where about 1988 the state rep was a guy named Douglas Huff, and he was under indictment, and he was the Democratic incumbent, and it's a very Democratic district. And so there were actually 9 Democrats running in the primary that year because everybody saw that they had an opportunity to knock Huff off. Now, we were kind of worried that Huff would win, and the Republicans usually run some token nomination, or maybe they don't even run anybody at all. So Mark decided to run for the Republican nomination, figuring if Huff won the election, there would at least be a credible candidate to run against him and maybe be able to win. And so I was Mark's political campaign manager, and so I had to learn about all the laws for getting on the ballot and signatures on petitions and things like that. And Mark did win the Republican primary. Huff did not win the Democratic primary, and so Mark wasn't really too interested in winning the general election after that, because the candidate who was nominated was a pretty good one, but had Huff won, I think Mark would have been in a real battle, and might have had a possibility of winning, even though it wasn't a Republican district, because we saw a few years later in Chicago when Dan Rostenkowski got knocked off by an unknown Republican just because he was under indictment too. So Mark might have had a chance, but that was kind of my big baptism of fire. So after I'd run, I managed a campaign as well.
I first became interested in politics when Barry Goldwater ran for president.
Uh-huh.
And I was one of those young Turks in the Republican Party in the state of Utah that took over the caucus, which in turn took over the state convention, which in turn, well, the end result was poor Barry Goldwater won 2 states, Arizona, where he's from, and Utah. But I've had a fascination with the mechanics of the political system. Now, we all go to school. We all get the civics class in high school that we sleep through and so forth. In fact, I can remember when the 18-year-olds got to vote, and boy, that was going to be the wave of the future, a political rebirth. What happened? Squat.
Exactly.
There's a voter apathy that we keep rediscovering every 2 to 4 years. I don't know why. I'm a C-SPAN junkie too, so I'm glued. That's always going on in the background when I'm sitting there in the book review doing my paperwork and such. But so when books like Winning Political Campaigns, these little how-to manuals come through, and there's one about every 5 or 6 years that comes down the pike. This happens incidentally to be better than most because it's more practical and realistic than most. I see these young guys knocking on my door, introducing me to themselves. They're running, for the city council. They're running for the county board. They're running for dog catcher. That's basically where you learn how to do this stuff.
Exactly.
There are very few people that come in on the state level, and nobody that comes in on a federal level out of nowhere. Because there are so many minefields that you have to tiptoe through. Politics is part law, part personality, and the rest is pocketbooks.
Absolutely.
Well, how did you came to feel a need to write this book, I presume, after years in the trenches?
Yeah, and actually it's based on my journalistic experience, because what we would discover covering all those candidates on the near west side of Chicago in all those districts that seemed to meet in our coverage area was that a lot of people really were making basic mistakes. They had a lot of good ideas, might have been good candidates, might have been good elected officials, but kept making mistakes. And the one little incident that really kind of got me thinking that I'd like to write this book someday, when we would ask candidates to send us pictures of themselves that we could run along with our articles in the newspaper, they'll send pictures and they won't put their names on the back. And there was actually one day where somebody on our staff was opening up all the mail. It seemed like a bunch of the candidates' pictures came in the same mail that day.
Right.
And so he was putting them on a pile, and when he was done, he had this pile of people who were all candidates, and none of the names were on the back, and we didn't know who was who. And so, that's a basic little thing, that people aren't doing. And so consequently, we couldn't run the pictures in the paper, and that maybe cost some people some votes. If somebody would have recognized their face, they might have voted for them. Other little things. An interesting thing that I've discovered as a political journalist is, while legally a candidate has to put their address on their nominating petition, and you're able to find that from the Board of Elections, they don't have to put a phone number. And a lot of times candidates have an unlisted phone number at home. And they don't have, particularly if they're running a real low-budget campaign like dog catcher or something like that, or even if they're running for state rep, we've run across this sometimes, they don't have a campaign phone number. You can't get in touch with the candidate. Now, that's basic little stuff that people ought to be doing that they don't even have a clue about. So that's kind of what set me off, that got me to thinking that a book like this was really needed. Like you say, books like this come out about 5-6 years, every 5-6 years. I've read a few of them, but I've tried to make it basic so people can get involved in politics in the grassroots level.
Well, that's where this book stands out. Your predecessors that I've read tend to be long on philosophy and short on how-to, cookbook, 1, 2, 3 checklist kinds of things. For example, one of your chapters here is called Campaign Literature. And indented, this is what it looks like. Indented is color, layout, mailing, technology, message, printing, type, photos, communicating with production professionals, which I found very interesting, direct mail letters, sample ballots. There are very few wheels that have to be reinvented
Exactly.
in this game. So what you do is you go take a look at somebody else's wheel and then just adapt it to your own particular situation. Yeah.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be from the political world, because besides working for newspapers, I've also worked in university public relations and also university fundraising. And so actually a lot of what I learned about, say, publication production or fundraising, I got at the university level. It's a little different, but it's very applicable. And so again, I've tried to kind of meld every area of my career and of my life into this book. So I applied a lot of the lessons that I learned at the university, as a professional, to the political realm as well. And since I've worked in the political realm a little bit and covered it, as a journalist a lot, I feel it's a good combination.
Well, this particular book, something that's worth the price all by itself is that he has a list of appendices, each of which is like a sample itinerary for speakers at a political dinner. How do you line people up? The order in which they speak. Do you want to put your power puncher up front, or leave them, for the end? Also, one of the things you got to pay attention to is the introducers to the main speakers. You got some that got diarrhea of the mouth, so by the time the poor guy finally gets up there, the clock is run. All kinds of little picky things that can make or break a media event, a fund raising gathering, all kinds of things. And like I say, here's a how-to book that will help you. First of all, it demystifies the process, which is important if you're a non-specialist general reader that never stuck toe in political waters before. It demystifies the process. And the second thing is that it gives you ways to analyze what you want to do so you can avoid mistakes. Experience may be the best teacher, but it's also the one with the most expensive tuition, kind of thing. One of the things that seems to be brand new to how politics was done 30 years ago when I first, got interested in it, is the advent of the computer. That is the advent of the website, email, and all the rest. I know that, maybe 4 years ago, most of the senators did not have websites.
Exactly.
Today, every one of them does.
Absolutely.
And so forth. So what kind of impact is this technology making for local races, municipal races, county races, things of that?
Well, computers actually have a tremendous impact on local races, Jim, because there's a lot of things computers can do that your staff used to do, whether it's like collating lists, updating lists, updating phone numbers, things like that. The computer is a tremendous tool for organization and for freeing up people to do other things. And, shoe leather is still the most important thing in a campaign, going out and door to door, whether it's the candidate or the staff or the volunteers, and meeting with people. And the computers take up a lot of functions that, people used to have to do, freeing them up to actually get out in the community a lot more. Another thing computers can do is it kind of turns everybody in a campaign into someone who can generate literature, which is real important. You don't have to hire a professional designer anymore. It's not a bad idea to have a little professional design advice, and one thing I mentioned in the book is that just because your computer can do a lot of different functions and have 72 typefaces on it, you probably shouldn't have 72 typefaces on your piece of literature. And so, but computers can speed the print process tremendously, and direct mail and print are still very important in campaigns. And you asked about lower ballot campaigns. Print is still, print and shoe leather are still the two most important things. We had a aldermanic race in Chicago, which I mentioned in the book, and one of the aldermanic candidates actually bought TV time. This was a fellow who had a lot of money, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on TV time, but you can't really target TV to one ward of the city. And so 90% of the voters that he was reaching were people who couldn't vote for him anyway. The guy who actually won the race did a computer-generated ad, took it out in the local newspaper, full-page ad, and he ended up winning the election. A lot of lower-level candidates have websites as well, and what websites do, whether you're lower level, higher level, is that they let you really react to news quickly. So, for example, if a candidate makes a charge against your candidate or yourself if you're running, you can get your response out on the website right away, and so whether the media pick it up or not, at least you've got your response out there. Whereas in the old days, you might not be able to get a response out there, and certainly if you depended on the mail, if a charge was made or something bad happened the last couple of days of the campaign, there really would be no way to get it out to the voters. So the computers just do a ton of stuff that people used to do and let you respond a lot more quickly. Even the congressional candidate in our district, Danny Davis, he used his website rather interestingly, and I mentioned this in the book as well, because Davis is from the west side of Chicago, which is a rather poor area of the city, and he was an alderman in that district and a county commissioner. But when he ran for Congress, the district not only runs in the poor area of the city, but goes out to the suburbs and also to the downtown area where a lot of the richer people live. And so Davis got a web page, and this was a couple of campaigns ago when that was not really that prevalent, and that allowed him to connect with the more well-to-do people in the district. And Davis and I think there were about 4 candidates running for the office, and Davis ended up winning the election, and he got a lot of those votes in areas where he really didn't have a base, so he really used it effectively.
Back in my Goldwater days, our technologies were typewriters and Xerox machines. And it would take a whole room of us, to get a mailing out. And today there's one person with one computer connected to one printer, and boom, your mailing is created. The role of the political party. Now, there's another thing that has altered over the years. You just wouldn't almost recognize the relationship today compared to what it was 10, 20, or especially 30 years ago.
Exactly.
You made reference to the Daily Machine, which was the Chicago kind of thing. But today there seems to be a kind of a dilution in the relationship between the political party and the candidates. Can you speak a little bit about that in terms of someone who is aspiring to run for an office where it's basically Democrat, Republican, and maybe once in a while an independent?
Yeah. Well, the relationship between the candidate and the party, if you would have listened to the predictions maybe 20 or 30 years ago, things have worked out completely differently, because everyone had predicted that party labels wouldn't really mean much anymore, with the proliferation of the media, that the individual would matter a lot more. Well, what's happened because of our information overload is that the party labels have become even more important, because people just don't have time to study every little race and every candidate down on the ballot, and so the party label has become much more important than it was in the past. If you're a Democrat, you'll probably vote for the Democrat for Cook County Commissioner or something like that. If you're a Republican, you'll probably vote for the Republican for dog catcher, whereas maybe 30 years ago, you might have actually paid a little more attention to the individuals in those races. So that's turned out exactly the opposite of what the pundits predicted 30 years ago. On the other hand, the strength of the parties has been diluted, because it used to be the party bosses, the party caucuses, the county commissioners, the state central committeemen who picked the candidates. And with the opening up of the primary and the loosening of laws that allowed people to get on the ballot, there's been a lot more people who are able to get on the ballot, and the parties have a lot less control over who gets on the ballot. So, for example, we had a race on the near west side, like I had mentioned before, where there were 9 candidates running on the Democratic side. That wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. But also, the state rep who was under indictment 30 years ago likely would have gotten the nomination because he was backed by the party. That didn't happen because the voters elected a woman who was, I think, a Park District official. So very, very low-level person, but she just ran a good campaign, a good grassroots campaign, and she was able to get the nomination for state rep, and she's been state rep for the past 10 years. So what that does to a person who's an aspiring candidate is the party is not really that necessary for you. You don't really have to be that tight with the party to get the nomination. You've just got to run a good campaign, and the party will embrace you, because once you get that nomination, you'll have access to all the party's the things that they can provide, like certain campaign advice or field workers or things like that. So things have changed a lot, but changed for the better for people who want to get into the political system.
Parties have three things that they can provide you. One is the imprimatur of legitimacy. The second is manpower, and the third is finances. Of course, what they require in return is a certain degree of loyalty while you're campaigning, loyalty if you win the office, and so every candidate has to walk a fine line. You got to know when to buck the party and when not to, when to go with your heart, when to go with your head.
Exactly.
Know when to bet, know when to fold them, know when to run. Politics and poker have a lot in common. We have been talking about this book, Winning Political Campaigns. We've been talking about it in terms of running for an office, but there is another element in the political landscape. In fact, we saw it in this current political land. We have some states like California that have resolutions or constitutional amendments and things like that that they vote for. Here in Wisconsin, we don't have that particular system, but we have something very similar to it when they have sort of like resolutions or straw polls that are put on the ballot. They're not ballot initiatives they don't get automatically voted into law like they do in California.
Yeah.
But they're seen as sort of like congressional guidelines, consultation.
Strong advice.
Strong advice kind of thing. And we have a lot of people crop up on all sides of a given issue and all sorts of issues. Well, this particular book personally would recommend to people trying to promote a cause as opposed to a person.
Absolutely.
Because the mechanics are virtually identical.
Absolutely.
Well, you said absolutely. I was going to turn to say, do I read it right?
Now, see, this is a good book, not for candidates, but for people who want to work on a campaign. And like Jim said, it doesn't have to be a campaign for an individual. It can be a campaign for an issue, because it gives you organizing techniques. It gives you techniques for running events. It gives you techniques for creating effective print literature. It gives you techniques for creating effective media relations, and that's all very vital to a referenda campaign. So the book is not only good for candidates and not only good for referenda campaigns, but it's good for people who want to work on a campaign or volunteer on a campaign as well. And it's good for people who want to become political consultants, because whether you want to do that as a full-time job or whether you just want to get involved in the political process, the more information you have and the more ability you show, the quicker you're going to move up and the more important position you're going to get.
My job as a book reviewer is I pick up a book like this and I have to answer a series of questions. One is it good, bad, or mediocre? Deciding that it's a good book, then I move on to another question, which is, who is the intended readership I would recommend this book to? And in addition to aspiring politicians, in addition to cause or issue-oriented community groups, I would recommend this to political science teachers, from the high school to college to even the university, supplemental reading lists and poli-sci. Every community library, every university library, and every high school library with a strong social issues, what do they call it, civics. They call it civics back in my day. There's more names for it. Social studies.
Sure.
I should have this book partly because of the enthusiasm of youth. Any political management that can tap into the enthusiasm, the endurance, and the cheap labor pool, that is the youthful volunteer. And this is a supremely effective tool for going about doing just that.
As a matter of fact, I'm involved with an organization in Illinois called Democratic Leadership for the 21st Century. It happens to be a Democratic organization, although this book is certainly good for anyone of any political stripe to get more involved in the system. But that's exactly what DL21C does. Its purpose is to get younger people involved in the political system. We used to call it an organization for people under 40, but as the age has creeped up a little, it's really an organization for anybody. But it's an alternative to people who want to get involved in politics and don't really want to enter through the mainstream parties. And we provide just that. We provide a labor pool and young enthusiastic volunteers. So we're hoping that this book will do well.
Now, Bill, this book is published by Denali Press, who are out of Juneau, Alaska, as I recall. They have a website.
Yes, they do.
And they have email address and so forth. Do you have a website? Do you have a phone number that people viewing this audience saying, hey, where can I learn more? Where can I get hold of this book?
Sure. Well, I have an email address. It's anbcomm@interaccess.com, or you could call us at 773-866-0024, and that's my company, ANB Communications, and we do freelance political consulting, we do writing, we do public relations and print production and a lot of related items like that.
Now, this book was published in 1997? 1998?
No, just
1998.
Came out a couple of months ago.
And what kind of print run you have?
It's about 1,000 right now. As of this point, 39% of the press run is sold out already, and the book really just came out a few weeks ago. And so we're hoping if this sells out, then we'll print a lot more. And we're thinking this might be a good backlist book for the publisher, something that they might keep around for years and just print again as they need to, because the information in here is really timeless. We're always going to have political campaigns, and people are always going to need technique and how-to, and like you said, a kind of a cookbook, format on how to get things done.
For example, one of the sections is on comportment. How do you handle yourself in the public eye? And you cover alcohol, drugs, grooming, impropriety, questions. Boxers or briefs, I think, seared that one into everybody's mind. Humor and fun. Can you have fun in the grim world of cutthroat, mudslinging politics? Well, the answer, I'm happy to say, is yes, if you know how to do it.
Exactly. People get involved in a campaign, and like a lot of work, because it is a lot of hard work, it becomes drudgery. And you see some candidates, even senators and governors, who just obviously aren't having fun with this anymore. If you look at some of our most popular political officials, Ronald Reagan, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, they obviously had a lot of fun campaigning, they had a lot of fun governing, and that rubbed off on people, and people just felt good being around them, they felt good seeing them, they felt good voting for them. So fun is a real important thing. In fact, I mentioned a little incident in there when John F. Kennedy was going over to meet with Nikita Khrushchev. One of his advisors said, make sure you have fun over there. And it kind of startled JFK, because they were talking about nuclear weapons and the Cold War and a lot of things like that. But so sometimes we can forget that that's really why you should be doing anything. And if politics is your chosen career, you really ought to have fun with it.
The book is Winning Political Campaigns by William Bike. This for Midwest Book Review and Book Watch. Goodbye, good luck, good reading.